Delighted to be joined by Darren and Charlotte. I've had the pleasure of knowing Darren for some time and have been really impressed by the way that Lorien work, not just as a recruiter, but really position themselves as a partner organisation, the different ways that they can help. And we've worked together more recently on things like sustainability that you might think sit kind of quite outside of the normal remit for recruiters. And it's been brilliant to see that level of engagement. So when we started looking at speakers for innovation, Darren was quite a natural person for us to come to talk about how they work and also what their clients are doing. I'm delighted that Darren then introduced us to Charlotte, who's their head of innovation and insights, to really get that macro sense within a listed corporate company as to how they can innovate, when that's right to do, when that's right to work with other people. And we've had some fascinating conversations about that, and absolutely, as I say, delighted that they're both joining us to give us some of those insights and hopefully some really useful tips for those of you sitting there in large corporates thinking, how can we be more agile and innovative? But also those of you who are maybe sitting there thinking, we've got an absolutely fantastic idea. How on earth do we get a large corporate to come on that journey with us? So just going to come over to you first, Darren, if you could just give us a little bit of an insight into what your role is.
Yeah, no problem. Morning, Ilona and Charlotte. So my role is Director of Solutions and Insight within Lorien, and we're a tech-focused recruitment solutions provider. So it's part of my role to really engage with our current prospective clients really regularly and try and diagnose and analyze what it is that they may need. Sometimes one of the hardest things there to say is you don't need any innovation. It can be really easy to throw a lot of things at these people, but yeah, it's my job to then go away, horizon scan what is out there, see what's appropriate for them, and put that into a effective recruitment solution for them.
Fantastic, and we will come on to this later, but I can imagine this year has definitely thrown a few curveballs at everybody in doing that. So if I could just come to you next, Charlotte, to give an explanation of your role in that kind of parent company.
Yes, morning everyone. I'm Charlotte Horton and I run Impellam's innovation programme. So we have an internal innovation hub called Origin. I work across all of our brands in all of our 3 territories. So that's APAC, North America and the UK. And we look at how we can build a platform for everyone within our business to come to us with an idea that can be heard. We can then decide whether that's something we're going to pursue internally. And we also work really closely with our customers, so with people in roles like Darren and our customer office that we're forming to make sure we're kind of always doing kind of customer-centric innovation. And then thirdly, I guess, keeping an eye on the external market, so what's kind of coming both in the staffing industry and outside of it, so that we can kind of synthesize that into points of view that we decide what we do next with and kind of how we tackle those problems and opportunities that we see.
Fantastic. And one of the things that we've kind of mentioned a few times over the course of this innovation exchange is that innovation is as much about process as it is about products and getting that kind of culture right. And it's fantastic to see the way you explain that role. That in itself is quite an innovative setup in the way that you do things, but also in the way that you engage multiple people across the business. So for you, Darren, what does that process look like? How do you go about thinking, actually, there's a problem here and we can either help you to solve it directly or we can involve a third party to bring that solution in?
Well, it's interesting because the two aren't always like directly connected and joined up. So, for example, we speak to our customers all the time and are always working with them on kind of their strategic priorities. At the same time, we'll run quarterly innovation sessions with them. So we'll showcase once a quarter all the kind of best tech that's out there in the market. But it's the two don't really meet sometimes because in the background, me and my team will review over 150 new technologies every year. We talk about tech innovation. And I always feel bad when I speak to some of these vendors because I'll speak to someone who's absolutely amazing and we love their product. But at the end of every call, I will say to them, it could be 12 months before I speak to you again because there just might not be a need for us to work with you yet with one of our client partners. And I always explain to them, we'll catch up regularly, and time will come where I'll give you a call that I will genuinely need you for something. So when we speak to our clients, they like you said, Ilona, it's not always about like a piece of tech innovation that solves something. It can, I think, of the most basic innovation that we've done, and I do definitely class it as innovation, where quite often a client will come to say, I need to hire 50 software engineers this year. It's one of the most hardest skill sets to hire purely because of competition. And that's when we look and break down their processes. So quite often what we'll find is that, they're back on somebody's profile, they're asking somebody to do 3 interviews in a technology test. And innovation in that form, back that process, re-engineering it for them. So it can take all kinds of different forms. And I think we talk about it quite a lot at Impellam about tuning into our customers. I think that's so important to really get to the real crux of what it is that they're trying to do, not just from an overall organization level, but on the ground where innovation and things can sometimes fall apart, maybe hiring management, sort of working from the macro and the micro to really get under the skin of that organization and give them a true solution rather than throw back at it for the sake of it, really.
Brilliant, and quite a balance of interest there, that you're kind of gatekeeping that what's going on with tech innovations, who are all your potential suppliers, staying close to them, but then absolutely customer centric, what does somebody actually need and when. Charlotte, you obviously have then those same 2 competing things of being, this supplier relationship, the customer relationship, but then we're also throwing in your shareholders. You're a listed company. Ultimately, you have to do what is in their best interest. And everybody loves innovation when it works, that we're like, brilliant, we've got this fantastic new innovative solution. It's making us loads of money, customers happy, suppliers happy, shareholders happy. But that's not going to happen every time. So how do you go about working out that balance of risk, and when is it right for you to say, we're going to go ahead with this, or actually maybe this is something that we're going to wait for a third party to bring in because that risk level isn't right for us?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Someone actually once said to me before I took this job, you're crazy, it's going to be the hardest job you've ever had, because corporates always tell you they want to innovate and they want to be able to do things, but at the same time, because they're so focused obviously on providing shareholder returns, that risk of being able to fail, although it's widely accepted that you need to fail in order to innovate, actually balancing the 2 in reality is really, really challenging. So I think from an Impellam perspective, we always look at, I guess, that buy, build or partner kind of strategy, and we've taken the approach that we want to have a kind of a balanced portfolio of initiatives where we spread that risk based on the risk appetite that we have as an organization. And I think if you look at, I guess, other big technology companies and organizations that are actively innovating, you tend to see that people will do the same. So they'll spread their mix of initiatives across those kind of buy, build or partner, looking at things that they can do from an incremental and a re-innovation perspective that fits within their current business model competence and the technical capabilities that they have, versus where they have to go out and do something that's probably a bit more disruptive or radical. But it's just how people weight how much time and money and effort they spend on each of those. I think that you see changes. I was actually reading a Booz & Co report the other day, and one of the insights that was really interesting on that is that there didn't seem to be a direct correlation between the amount of money that the most innovative companies were spending on their innovation initiatives. It was actually probably the execution of them. But like Darren said, even from kind of a micro level, I often think it's about timing. What else is going on in the business? What else are your customers saying in terms of where you want to spend that time and effort, and whether one of those is more appropriate than the other. But typically, I would say if you're going to do something that sits outside of current capabilities and current competence, you're probably going to be best off going to look to partner or to buy, because actually building that from within is going to be really, really challenging. And actually, the other thing I would just say is that corporates typically are not really set up necessarily. They're focused on delivery and execution. So when you're in that kind of exploratory early stage of innovation, actually doing it from the structures of a corporate are really challenging, because you're set up with different KPIs, different metrics, different processes in terms of being able to get something out. So yeah, timing I think is key, and then just depending on what it is and how you're trying to innovate. So what is the problem that you're trying to solve?
Brilliant. And yes, such an interesting mix of things there to consider, because I think we look at it so often, don't we? It's like, what's the cost of doing it? But actually there's a huge time cost there. And I always think there's a lot of courage in organizations not just jumping in and actually being like, do you know what, we are not the right people to do this. To then actually kind of accept that and be like, right, well, we're not the right people to do this. So where do we go next? How do we do that? And obviously having people like Darren on the ground who are very kind of close to what is going on helps, that if you then go, right, well, actually, we do need this. We're not the right people to build it. Who do we want to buy from? Who do we want to partner with? You've got those kind of ongoing relationships, which...
That's generally what happens, Ilona. I want to build it, and Charlotte tells me I need to find someone who's an expert, rather than me trying to do it on Fiverr.
We'll do it. We'll pop round. We'll set this up. We can make these things happen. Brilliant. So just staying with you then, Darren, you're saying, like you have these things and, whilst we jest, there is going to be this bit of, yeah, maybe we could build this, like maybe we could find somebody, because part of your role, but also part of your just, your personality type is going to be, that big picture looking ahead, that there will be things that frustrate you about your industry on a daily basis, and you are going to be looking at those. Not the type of person who, day in, day out is there kind of being like, oh, well, this is terrible, but actually looking at it being like, there's a real opportunity here for something to improve. Recruitment is not known at being at, the forefront of innovative ways of working, for various reasons. So how do you go about that kind of horizon scanning and then being able to kind of work out what's horizon scanning, this should change and we can do something about it, and where are there potentially blockers from, government restrictions as to what the industry is able to do?
I think, well, a lot of what we do is led by data, and looking at what's happening. Charles mentioned judging what we can see kind of coming down the pipeline in terms of the trends. For example, we know now, and we've kind of predicted it for a little bit of time, that we're the most buoyant job market for quite a long period of time. So we know that that's coming, and we know that when job market's like that in the tech world, that Lorien, that there's going to be a tight workforce, there's going to be candidates inundated with lots of different opportunities, lots of different offers. But when I think about what the recruitment industry needs in regard of that, I think we need to start or do more to take care of our candidates. There's tons of tech out there, automation to make things quicker, easier, but I think I don't see too much by way of pure looking after candidates, and I think that's really important. And I think outside of recruitment on its own, I think the UK needs more opportunities for upskilling and upskilling innovation. I think I speak to a lot of our clients about things like internal mobility and retraining, bringing more people into tech. So I think more focus, in the next 12, 18 months, 2 years on that is going to be crucial, really. I think the UK as a whole, because even though people are doing more tech related things in school and coming through, I just think the gap is so big. It's going to take some major changes to make sure that we don't get left behind on a global scale, I don't think.
So interesting to hear someone who's absolutely tech focused in that industry, and actually the innovation is it's so people focused that it's we can make everything faster, we can do more online, but actually we need to look after our people. And I think that upskilling bit is absolutely crucial. The more that we can do in that space to bring people into the industry, that is ultimately what's going to meet the skills shortage.
We spoke about sustainability quite a lot in the past, haven't we, Ilona, as well? I think that's another huge thing that we can do. I mean, everyone's so much more mindful of it now. Think about our clients; it's definitely in the top 3 of their board agendas, sustainability. I think the more that people are aware of the small changes that they can do would be effective as well. And I'm sure there'll be some kind of innovative solution or process around that in the not too distant future.
And I think what was really interesting when we chatted around sustainability was not just, you having this sense of, we need to do more in that space, and your clients having that sense, but actually for recruiting people and retaining people into the business, sustainability became so important. And one of the facts from the webinar that we did that I now tell to literally everybody I speak to was that the average age of a KPMG employee is 25. So having that kind of younger generation coming through that now just expect you to have a sustainability policy, that they might see, innovations in sustainability and the race to net zero is kind of sitting outside kind of the recruitment piece, but actually what keeps your people happy, what gets them through the door, what makes them not want to jump ship, can actually sit quite outside those core areas of things like who's managing you and your pay and that kind of more obvious side of things. And it's been brilliant to see you engaging so many of your customers in those decisions. So coming back to you then, Charlotte, sticking on that kind of horizon scanning piece, that you've got that kind of very top level view across the group and reporting kind of back into shareholders. Is there anything that you can see coming kind of trend wise across that industry that you're kind of looking at and being like, this is where I expect to see a lot of innovation coming?
Well, interestingly, I'd probably echo some of Darren's sentiments, really. I mean, the things that I think we're really focused on at the moment are looking at the workforce of tomorrow and, where are they coming from? Who are they? What are their expectations? And we're just not set up in the UK at the moment, I think, to meet those, either in terms of having, the right skill sets and the right roles, and but also that kind of, as Darren mentioned, that sustainability piece. There's a massive movement at the moment. It's been around for a while, actually, called B Corporation. There's now about 4,000 companies who are signed up, and in the UK there's a big campaign at the moment around the Better Business Act. But actually what you see is they're essentially a B Corporation. The big difference between a B Corporation and a kind of standard company will be that the company articles need to not just serve shareholder interest, they also need to focus on providing value to their customers and to their employees. And actually that becomes more and more of an expectation with younger generations who want that sense of equality. It's really, really, really important. But back to the upskilling piece, I think there's a couple of things that from a macro level in terms of organisations and what they need to be thinking about is internal mobility, absolutely one. So how do you take somebody that's been working in one area of your business, instead of losing that person who has all that tacit knowledge and cultural kind of understanding and the values that obviously work for the business, how do you give them an opportunity to upskill and to move? So not just upskilling when you're coming into a business, but actually upskilling once you're in an organisation so that people can better move talent around. I also think that organisations are going to have to think more about building a kind of a model for not just taking kind of contingent workforces, temporary workforces to bolster when they need, but actually tapping into candidates that are just looking for part-time, or gig type roles that they're doing in that kind of portfolio career space, so that they can balance their workforces better. And then in the upskilling piece, so in terms of actual kind of hard skills, there's been a lot of stuff in the last few years around apprenticeships, but I would say a lot of those are still not necessarily focused on the skill sets that we're going to need. There's a really interesting organisation, Multiverse, who are doing a lot of stuff in the kind of digital and tech space, but I think it's just there's a gap between quite often academic study, corporate and organisational skills that are required, and there are lots of initiatives happening at the moment in terms of bridging those, but there probably aren't enough, and they're probably not diverse enough for businesses really to have a continuous flow, and for people coming into the workforce to know what opportunities are really available to them. I still think there's a big lack of knowledge around actually what's out there and what do businesses need, so bridging that gap will be really important. And then the other thing that I would love to see is, obviously we spend the last kind of 18 months, predominantly we've been working remotely, working from home, and staffing and recruiting businesses have been running their operations virtually, and that's meant that from a candidate perspective, and Darren talked about the candidate experience, candidates haven't been having to go in to do a face-to-face kind of physical check for a right to work document. We've adopted processes that enable people to do this virtually, which actually for kind of blue collar workforces where they're having to spend money to get on public transport to come in to do that face-to-face check, and in a couple of weeks' time, just over a week's time, we're going to revert back to from a legislation perspective, having to do those face-to-face checks. And I just look at all the other ways that we do things today. You know, I don't have to go in and do a passport check face-to-face, but I can get a passport issued. You know, why is that right to work check still face-to-face? I think there's some kind of legislative reform changes that I would love to see, particularly after the world has shifted over the last kind of 18 months. I know there's a lot of REC, which is the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, campaigns going on looking at that. So I think, you know, there's some very specific things that I would like to see, but yeah, I think that people space is actually the kind of the biggest thing that organisations, governments, individuals need to be concerned and thinking about. How do we help people understand what's out there for them? How do we get people the right skills, whether they're going into a business for the first time or whether they're in one already? Because otherwise I think we're going to see a really more continuing gap between what businesses need to do their jobs and actually what talent's available.
Absolutely, and like you say, like there are lots of initiatives, but clearly, like, we've not solved that problem yet. There is still that gap, and yet really interesting things like that right to work check. That, you know, it has been, you know, a terrible 12 to 18 months in a lot of ways. But one of the things that we've obviously spoken about a lot today has been that those times lead to innovations. We change the way we've worked, we change the way that we do things, and it does seem like somewhat crazy that, like, we've proved we can do things in a certain way, and then it's like, yeah, we can't do that anymore. Hopefully there will be changes coming that means that where we have developed, you know, better ways of doing things that are easier for the candidate, that are just more streamlined for organisations, that they're things that we can take forward. So the final thing that I'm going to come to both of you on is tips for both SMEs and startups and large corporates who are wanting to become more innovative. What are the tips that you'd give, seeing both sides of that relationship, on making that successful? So if I come to you first, Darren, what's the kind of advice that you give when you're talking to those potential partner organisations, the people developing new tech? What do you tell them if they say, you know, would absolutely love to work with a massive corporate dream client? What can they do to make themselves more attractive in that process?
I've got so many like deep minds. I wouldn't try to take because I'm I don't want to out anyone. But I think my advice might sound really basic, but I think it's really important. And I think it's the first thing I would say is you're going to have to be patient. If you're a startup and you're going to work with large corporate, even one as what I think Impellam is agile, you're going to have to be patient because you can't always turn decisions around in a day or in the same time frames that they may have been used to. So I think patience is definitely a virtue when you're like a smaller organisation to work with a large corporate. I'm not saying things drag on forever, but it can take some time to get through some processes. And I think as well, just organisation goes a long way. Being really organised and presented like an organised front, I think, goes a long way in giving a larger partner just confidence that you know what you're doing and you're structured, and you know, confident that what you're bringing to the table will be a success. Really, I think that's huge.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely great advice. Probably for a business of any size there, like patience and organisation. And yeah, as a startup, they're definitely the two things that we find more difficult, because literally, like, we set up in a pandemic, we run our entire business over WhatsApp, like we make decisions in, you know, like 30 seconds flat. And we come with, you know, obviously that passion and excitement to people, and like, oh yeah, like they actually need to go and speak to other people and sort this out and have a process, and we need to be able to evidence certain things. But have to say, being on the supplier side of that relationship with Lorien, like the communication and the speed that you do things, it's definitely not that slow at all. So there's a real like balance there, I think, in that you're used to dealing with, you know, smaller companies and that kind of speed, and obviously the industry that you're in is very fast moving. So there's definitely some great things that are there in your processes to manage that. So coming to you then, Charlotte, as the kind of corporate side of it, when we have, and yeah, we speak to lots of large corporates who are saying, you know, we'd love to be more innovative, we want to work with more partners, we want to be more active in this space. What are the kind of tips that they can put in to make themselves more attractive to innovative people, to innovative partners?
I think actually there's a few things at the beginning, and one is really understanding what you're trying to get out of it. I think quite often, and everyone's guilty of this, there's almost like that magpie kind of syndrome where you get excited by something new and shiny. And then I think from a corporate perspective, you've got to be really clear around what actually is the problem you're trying to solve with it, and is there real benefit and value in doing it, so that you don't firstly waste the startup's time, because time is a really precious resource for most organisations, but particularly to startups, because they just don't have the same bandwidth and all the same kind of amount of resources and or capability in the team. So I think that's the first thing, being really clear on what it is you want to do, and then secondly, actually having a process to work with smaller startups and organisations. They're not big corporates, you can't put them through the same extensive processes that you would put, you know, a more mature supplier through. Firstly, because some of them may not actually be at a stage where they've got even all of the materials that they need to do that, so you kind of need to be cognizant, and also really do your due diligence and understand where that startup is, because one of the things I do see is sometimes startups are approaching corporations too early in their journey. They're not yet quite ready to go on that journey with a corporate, and equally a corporate may not be ready to partner with a startup. So there's almost kind of like an internal reflection point of it. If we're going to go down this journey of doing a startup corporate collaboration, you know, as a corporate, are we ready? How are we going to set up the process to work with these partners? And as a startup, you know, yeah, where are they on that kind of maturity scale? And are they going to be able to really provide their partner with what they need? And then I think the thing that they need to do collaboratively, which again, I know where we've done things that have worked kind of in their best format, is really spending some time looking at how do you create that mutual value and that mutual benefit to make sure that there's clear alignment from the get-go, and then you can start moving with momentum. But if you miss out those beginning pieces, you tend to find that expectations are mismanaged, and you're kind of going at different paces, or that you haven't been really kind of clear about, you know, where you are on either side of the coin. And I think that's when you can get into kind of hot water, and things tend to not work so well.
And just to add to that, you've got to have chemistry, haven't you, as well, Charlotte?
Yeah.
The partnerships that me and Charlotte have both worked on together, you want to work with people that believe in the same things that you do and are passionate about it. Excuse me. And I think, because quite often, I think when you work together, you're part of that same team. You don't see the lines or anything like that. So I think, you know, it's an opportunity to choose who you work with almost when you get into things. So I think the chemistry's got to be so important.
Brilliant. And yeah, absolutely key there, that whatever it is that we're trying to do, being able to pull people together as a team. And, you know, we've spoken about, you know, what you need to be able to innovate, and having those different views, those different expertise, those different ways of working are really important. But ultimately, like, that communication has to be absolutely spot on, because if it's not there, as you say at the beginning, that, you know, you've done that internal piece of saying like, right, well, what are our processes? What do we need to get out of this? To be able to ask the right questions to a startup who's maybe doing this for the first time, of being like, well, how are you going to manage this? What's already in place? Are you going to be able to deliver what we need? You know, they might be quite difficult conversations to have at the beginning, but they're the thing that's going to make it all fall apart further down the line. So great to see those processes being put into place. And I'm sure that for everybody watching, there's some really great nuggets of advice there in terms of, you know, how do you make sure that, you know, those partnerships are set up in the right way to enable you to then have that flexibility to develop something that's got real value for customers in the business. So thank you ever so much for joining us. Really excited to see what innovations we're going to see coming out next. I know you're working with some really exciting companies at the moment, and really keen to see, you know, how they develop. And as we do move out of this pandemic and start welcoming people physically back into the city and back about, it'll be really interesting to see, you know, how that impacts recruitment, if we will see those changes in the industry that we've mentioned, and how we kind of balance this virtual world and getting back to perhaps what was the norm 2 years ago. So thank you ever so much. We will include your details in the follow-up email if anyone wants to find out more about either company, or, you know, a bit of practical advice on working with corporates.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Ilona.